So next I need to put it on the mandrel, this being the mandrel. I've already got one of my bushings on here. Bushings have a very specific order, and depending on the width, and the instructions will tell you how to do that. They come with instructions that show your different bushings. So the mandrel, again, it's nice having the cap and base. I'm using the triangle to keep, if you had wood that the grain was flowing, it might be a little more important. Even acrylic, I like to make sure that it flows across the midline, so I'm putting these two ends in the middle, and I don't know if you can see it, but I've got a little drawn out here, cap, base, mandrel, and which side goes which. It kind of, after you've done a few of these, you don't really need that anymore. So slide that on there, then you put the first bushing. Again, the bushings are just to know how far down to turn the pin. You stop right even with the bushing, and that'll make it fit the pin parts right. So this has a double bushing on the inside, and then I put the final bushing on the outside, so 4 total. Then I like to put a little spacer, and I have a number of these depending on how long the blanks are. You might use 3 or 4 of those, or you might just use one like this one. And this one I'm just putting one spacer on there to give me a little room so the tool doesn't, when I'm cutting, the tool doesn't hit the washer here or the screw to tighten it. Don't over tighten it. You can bend your mandrel. If you over tighten it, it can kind of bow on you, and then it won't turn evenly. So next thing, I'll put this on the lathe, and first I'm going to sharpen the chisel real quick. I'm not going to go into too much of the sharpening of this tool because that would take a whole nother video, but I am going to use my Wolverine jig. It's set for the skew jig. There's different attachments you can put in there. I'm using a diamond wheel here. It takes very thin shavings. Every now and then I'll grind it off on a harder wheel to redo the bevel, which I just did on this tool not too long ago. Ground it down, because after a while, if you keep using the diamond wheel over and over, it'll start to wear down, and it'll start to make your bevel less sharp. It'll be kind of, kind of be spread like that, so I had to reground it. And I know some people get out and measure the angles and everything, but I just pretty much go by feel and the cutting of the machine, or the cutting of the blank. And after a while, you can kind of tell it's not cutting very well if you keep just redoing the diamond wheel. Diamond wheel takes very little off, keeps it cool. I've got my water over here. I don't know if you can see that, but that's for the other wheel, the coarser wheel. So here we go. So I've just kind of slid the pin blank mandrel into the lathe. One important thing, when you tighten this down, you don't want to overdo it. So again, you could bow your mandrel, and that could make it, that could make it off a little bit. So you don't want to overdo it when you tighten it. Just a little bit snug. You want too loose, it'll wobble too, and you'll feel it. So you can tell usually. When I start, I'm going to have the vacuum on. I've got a little vacuum attachment that suck the shavings out. When I start my skew chisel, I really just use the heel, the back part, the heels, the bottom part here, the heels right here. Use the heel, you put that on the blank, and then you start to tilt into it. At the same time, tilt sideways. It takes a little bit of learning curve. When you first start turning pins, you probably use a U-gouge, maybe one of the new tools where you just put the 4 carbide square and you just jam it in there. I can't get as much maneuverability with the other types of tools. This one I can kind of curve in and make a little body to the pin, make a little indentation where your fingers go toward the end. So I like the skew chisel, but finding that plane, it's like planing a boat. You got to find the exact right plane. So when I first tilt it in and it starts turning, I never cut my corners off. I know when you start out, you probably run it through a little V-shaped wood jig through your bandsaw and cut the corners off and get it closer to round, and some people even sand the corners off. It seems like you can go through a lot of sandpaper for that. But once you've developed enough skill, you can just leave it square, and as soon as you tilt it, as soon as you see those first few flakes start to fly, you'll know that's far enough. And you want to go thin shavings on this Acrylester. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the vacuum. You won't be able to hear me, and go ahead and turn it. One point, oh sorry, let me take my face shield off. I always wear a face shield. One point I wanted to make is when I turn this, I turn the machine all the way up as fast as it goes, which is really important for I used to chip these out a fair amount at lower speeds, and I found if you just turn it all, I'm over 3,000 I think on the RPMs. Let's see what we've got here. Yeah, I'm about 3264, so I'm over 3,000. blank is starting to round off. There's a little flat place on top still there, and it's mostly round by now. I actually made it pretty far through my first sharpening. Made it pretty far through my first sharpening, and I'm going to go sharpen the tool now. But I remember when I started out, sometimes I'd sharpen 6 times because I went real slow. I'm able to kind of gauge it a little better. Always cut downhill again, meaning as you get toward the end of the blank, you want to kind of cut down. You don't want to go uphill, or you could skip or slide. Just like bowl turning, I guess. Seems like it'd be a little better if you taper the ends first and keep the middle higher. When you get down to the end, though, you'll need to readjust it. So I'm going to go back and sharpen the skew chisel now. So I just finished my third tool sharpening, which isn't bad for one of these blanks. I would keep it very sharp. I'm starting to taper down now the base. I'm going to kind of give it an angle down toward, I use about the last 1/4 inch, maybe taper down, maybe more about 10 millimeters. Taper it on down. Then I'm going to put a little groove in here. You want to keep your lips a little proud of the bushing, so when you sand it down, you've got a little bit extra on each lip here, the 4 lips, the top, the middle section, and the bottom section, 2 middle sections. So you want to kind of bring it down, but leave it just a little bit proud, just a little wider than the bushing, so you can sand it on down to the bushing. This one I got a little bit of lip there. This one's too close, it's right on it, so I'm not going to shave any more there. With this cigar pin kit, it's very easy, like a lot of pins, to keep them too plump, keep them too big. You don't want too big a diameter. You want to really bring it down, especially in the middle sections. It'll be ballooning out and look really funny. So spend the extra time to get it down thinner. Get it as thin as you can, close to bushings where you still leave a little body. Again, I'll put a little groove. I put a little taper on the end of mine, and I put a little groove right above the taper, so a little place to hold your hand when you're cutting with the pin. I'll go in with the skew chisel in and out and bring out a little U there. So I put a little taper right in this part and a little taper at the end. Use a skew chisel to kind of come down on one side, one valley, then come down the other side. Now I'm going to sand it down. I'm going to start with a 250 grit. So for sanding, I'm actually going to use the 150 grit. Sorry, I said 250. I'm going to use 150 grit and go progressively through these different grits. This kit comes, I think it's Woodcraft, Wood River. And so I'll sand a little bit on each one. And you'll find that the 150 grits you'll run out of first, because you do the shaping and forming with the 150 grit. You can still form the pin a little bit with that. And by the time you get to the end, you need very little pieces, because you'd have to do less sanding just to get the scratches out from the previous grits. Once I'm through with this, then I'm going to use about 1,000 grit wet paper, and then I'm going to go through the micro mesh. There's about 15 grits of that. So we're going to polish this thing down really fine and then use a liquid polish on top. So I'm going to start by taking and doing a 250 grit. Get the tool rest out of the way. And I would have my dust collector on during this. You got to really slow it down. I slow it down. I know exactly where the knob puts. There's a little white slash on here, the minus and the plus sign for my lathe, and so I really slow it down for sanding. I don't want to melt it. It heats up real fast too, and you don't want to melt the plastic. Wood, you'll burn it too if you go too fast. So turn your lathe down. I guess at the spot I'm at, it's around 600 RPMs for my sanding, which I think is a decent amount for acrylic. Wood, I may even go slower so you don't burn it and turn it dark colored. I haven't had that happen with this, but it does heat up real easy. So it's dry sanding to start with, eventually end up being wet sanding. You can really kind of shape it a little bit and smooth it out if you've got hills and valleys, and bring it down to the bushings. I don't worry too much about hitting the bushings with the sandpaper. It's metal, and I figure when you do super glue it builds up on it anyway. So. But it kind of, you don't want to take your shape out of it either. You want to kind of sometimes curl it into the little groove there that I made. And another little groove here for your fingers to kind of get a hold on it. And then start to bring these edges down. I usually, with the 250, bring it really close to the bushing, if not right on it. The other ones don't tend to take as much off it. But anyway, I need to turn on the dust collector.